Hey all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani, and it is the first Monday in December, and so we are going to do our traditional MMIW episode. This one is sort of a two-parter, but they both play into each other, and I think you'll understand once we start talking. All right, let's get into the first part, shall we? Azraya Ackabee-Kokopenace was born on March 6, 2002, alongside twin brother Braden. Their parents were Marlon and Krista. They also had an older brother, Calvin, and are members of the Grassy Narrows First Nation in northwestern Ontario. Growing up, Azraya was described as the humorous one who loved fashion. She had a big smile that lit up a room, but she was subjected to bullying in school and ended up dropping out of Grassy Narrows School pretty early on. When her brother Calvin was just 17, he died of complications of muscular dystrophy and mercury poisoning. Don't worry, we'll get to the poisoning later, but this is about Azraya specifically, so let's stick to her for the moment, okay? The loss affected her, according to family. According to stories of the untold, quote, she started to demonstrate suicidal behavior, which resulted in her receiving grief counseling. She moved to a nearby city to live with a relative, but was hospitalized 4 months later for suicidal ideation, which resulted in her being briefly taken into the care of Children's Aid. After a suicide attempt, Azraya was placed in 3 short-term placements while she awaited admission into a treatment foster home located in southern Ontario. Once there, she received one-on-one supervision for 5 months. However, after a hospital visit from her family, she again began thinking about suicide and was readmitted to the hospital. Feeling alone and trapped, Azraya eventually moved back in with her family for approximately 6 months while under a supervision order, a move her family was supportive of. The 14-year-old is said to have frequently missed classes during this time, and due to that, she was deemed escalating challenges at home, asked to be put back into care for continued treatment, end quote. And for that, she was sent to a group home. On April 15th, 2016, Azraya went to a house party, failing it to make the group home's curfew, which was 9 p.m. The police were immediately notified, who located her and brought her to the Lake of the Woods District Hospital. At the hospital, she was transferred to an agency worker. Then she simply walked out around 11:20 p.m. According to a witness, she was seen walking to a nearby wooded area. Her family was not notified about her disappearance until around midday on April 16th. According to her father, the Ontario Provincial Police flagged him down while he was en route to Thunder Bay, Ontario. Upon speaking with them, he was asked to contact Kenora OPP Detachment for the news regarding his daughter. Then, the search began for Azraya, and numerous organizations ended up being involved in her search, including the OPP, the Northwest Regional Emergency Response Team, and a police canine unit. They initially searched the wooded area across from the hospital, but supposedly were unable to locate her. The Bear Clan patrol located in Winnipeg offered to help in the search after everyone else failed to find the missing teen. The next day, on April 17th, Daryl Contois of the Bear Clan patrol was walking with a group in the area's dense vegetation, performing a zigzag search along the highway where he noticed an eagle flying overhead. When he walked toward where it had been, he unfortunately saw Azraya hanging from a tree. The Ontario Provincial Police wouldn't say why they had contact with the teen on the night of April 15th. Marlon was later told Azraya's death was suicide, but he believes there are still too many unanswered questions about his daughter's final hours for any conclusions to be drawn. Quote, why couldn't they find her? End quote, he asked. Marlon also said after his daughter's body was found, searchers remembered seeing a Jeep parked near the area, but no one seemed to know who it belonged to. Quote, we still don't have her toxicology test results. If someone gave her something, drugs or alcohol, we want to know if they could have been charged, end quote, Marlon said. He went on to state, quote, "If she was suicidal already, they should have taken anything from her," end quote. However, Daryl Contois of the First Nations search group, again the Bear Clan, which found her, told CBC News it appeared that she did die by suicide. As the family doesn't think that this is suicide, she is listed on the MMIW website. I found it appropriate to leave her in. Now, let's talk about this mercury poisoning. The phrase, quote, "children of the poisoned river," end quote, is a common media epitaph referring to the Indigenous youth and community members of the Grassy Narrows First Nation in Northern Ontario, Canada, who have suffered from severe intergenerational mercury poisoning for over 60 years. A chloralkali plant in Dryden, Ontario, a subsidiary of Reed International, now RELX, discharged approximately 9 to 11 tons of inorganic mercury into the river system over 8 years in the years 1960s through the 1970s. In the aquatic environment, the inorganic mercury was converted into methylmercury, a more toxic compound that accumulated and magnified up the food chain, severely contaminating the local fish population. While dumping stopped in 1970, recent studies indicate the contamination is ongoing and possibly worsening. Current industrial wastewater discharge containing high levels of sulfate from the same mill exacerbates the problem by feeding bacteria that produces methylmercury from the legacy inorganic mercury still in the river sediments, meaning the mercury that contaminated the river is still affecting a central part of the community's life, diet, and economy, leading to the closure of their commercial fishery. Community members, including pregnant mothers and young children, consume the highly contaminated fish, which led to high rates of poisoning. This poisoning is due in part to the fact that methylmercury actively crosses the placental barrier, exposing developing fetuses at critical stages of brain development. This has resulted in a crisis where today's children and youth are living with ongoing, devastating legacy of exposure that began before they were born. Of this, Joseph Forrester stated, quote, "We weren't educated enough to know about mercury, so we continued eating the fish until we started feeling all these symptoms. And a few years ago, I had a heart attack, and one of the doctors was saying it's definitely got to be from the mercury," end quote. According to Cultural Survival, quote, "Between 1978 and 1994, Health Canada tested the umbilical cord blood of 139 infants in Grassy Narrows. When Williamson was born in 1983, his blood mercury level was scored at 18.5 micrograms per liter. As of 2010, the acceptable blood levels of mercury are 8 micrograms per liter, or lower in children 18 years of age and under, women of childbearing age, and pregnant women because of the developing nervous systems of the fetus and young children place them at higher risk of health effects from methylmercury." End quote. Additionally, in 1997, Health Canada said, quote, "There's no more mercury in the water. You guys are safe," end quote, says Judy De Silva, an elder and environmental health coordinator for the nation. The contamination in this community of about 1,000 residents again has affected 3 generations. 90% of the population in Grassy Narrows experiences symptoms of mercury poisoning, which include neurological problems ranging from numbness in fingers and toes to seizures and cognitive delays. According to a recent study by mercury specialists, then there's the psychological stress of seeing your friends and family stricken with these problems. Health services are simply a small nursing station, and that's really it there. A recent study found that nearly a third of children and youth with recorded exposure data have died at a young age, with half of those deaths occurring before age 40. The quote-unquote children of the poisoned river face a range of severe and chronic health issues, often consistent with Minamata disease, which can include neurological problems, memory and concentration issues, and severe headaches, difficulty with balance and muscle weakness, developmental disabilities and birth deformities, emotional and behavioral changes, including irritability, anxiety, and a higher risk of youth suicide. These health problems are compounded by psychological stress, grief, and limited adequate, obviously, access to health services and mental health support within their community. The situation is often described as a clear example of environmental racism and a failure of the government accountability. The community has been fighting for decades for a cleanup of the river and appropriate health care. A disability board was established in 1986 as part of a court settlement with Ontario and Canada and the two paper companies involved in the contamination. Neither the companies, the government, nor the Disability Board have ever admitted that anyone at Grassy Narrows has been poisoned, only that some people experience symptoms of Minamata disease, the disease name for the Japanese town where more than 100 people died after eating fish contaminated with mercury released into a lake by another chemical plant in the 1950s. A group of Japanese scientists have been studying people at the Grassy Narrows and White Dog First Nation for decades, and in 2014 provided evidence of the mercury contamination and resulting health issues, pressing the federal government to provide care and financial support to every resident in the two communities affected by mercury. But payments often amount to about $250 a month, which is the lowest allowed by the Disability Board. And that doesn't even pay for food, let alone medical care or any sort of treatment for them. Cleanup efforts. So, after years of delay, the Ontario government committed to an $85 million cleanup plan, and experts confirm the river can be cleaned. They did this in about 2017. Experts have laid out a multifaceted solution for this, including in situ treatments that focus on containing or neutralizing the mercury within the environment rather than an extensive removal. The primary methods discussed in scientific reports by the Grassy Narrows science team include sediment capping, and this method involves placing a layer of clean material such as sand or clean clay over the contaminated bottom sediments to physically isolate the mercury from the water column and the ecosystem. This prevents the mercury from becoming available to the food web and stops its downstream transport. A related approach is a thin layer capping, which uses a thinner layer of clean material. They've also brought about enhanced natural recovery, and this is an approach that involves the strategic, modest addition of clean clay particles to the system. The goal is to dilute the inorganic mercury concentrations in the mobile sediment pool, which in turn would lower the methylation rate and mercury concentrations in the fish and other biota. Chemical amendments. Scientists are exploring altering the redox or reduction oxidation conditions in the water and sediment by adding substances like nitrate or oxygen. This aims to disrupt the bacterial process that convert inorganic mercury into the more toxic methylmercury. And selenium addition. Research has explored the potential of adding low levels of selenium to the water column. Selenium can decrease mercury in the food web by binding with it, reducing its bioaccumulation in fish muscle. However, this approach is treated with caution due to its own potential for selenium toxicity if concentrations exceed thresholds. So that sounds more like a double-edged sword rather than a solution. These in situ methods are being explored in conjunction with source control measures such as a pump and treat system on the former mill site to stop further groundwater leakage. The Grassy Narrows First Nations' own scientific panel has conducted extensive pre-remediation studies to determine the most suitable and effective options for their specific river system. That is one of the other proposed treatments, the pumping and treating contaminated groundwater near the old mill site to stop the further leakage of mercury into the river system, along with applying amendments to the water and sediments to reduce the mobility and bioavailability of mercury. This could involve adding substances, again, like that clean clay or chemicals, such as the nitrate or oxygen, to disrupt the process. Measures to accelerate natural recovery by strategically adding modest amounts of pristine clay to the river system to bury the contaminated layers again and reduce its interaction with mercury, the water interface. Calling for the mill to stop discharging high levels of sulfate and organic matter, as these also exacerbate the methylmercury production in the river system. Management actions such as selective fish stocking or removal of certain species to promote food web conditions that decrease methylmercury concentrations and target fish populations. Continuously measuring mercury levels in fish and sediment to evaluate the effectiveness of cleanup efforts and adapt strategies as needed, with the involvement of the Grassy Narrows River team and youth. Still, there has been no active cleanup yet as of yet. As of late 2024 and into 2025, active remediation of the river has yet to begin, and there is no public timeline for a plan. A major challenge revealed in a 2024 study was that the mercury was dumped over a period of years into a large system of rivers, lakes, and tributaries. The sheer scale and complexity make a single, simple cleanup method difficult to apply across the entire area. Coupled with natural processes such as river meandering, storm flow, and bank erosion, continuously remobilize legacy inorganic mercury particles from the contaminated floodplains and sediments downstream, which means that merely addressing the original point source is not enough. To make matters worse, the most significant challenge is the conversion of relatively harmless inorganic mercury into highly toxic methylmercury by bacteria in the aquatic environment. Again, the current mill's discharge of sulfate and organic matter, quote, feeds, end quote, these bacteria, worsening the problem even without new mercury dumping. So, improper remediation techniques risk stirring up the sequestered mercury and allowing it to re enter the air and water cycle, potentially making the situation worse in the short term. This necessitates careful and meticulous scientific work to determine the safest approach. Scientists still face challenges in developing tools and precisely quantify the potential for different mercury sources to produce methylmercury and accumulate in the food web, which complicates targeted management strategies. The community's fish are still the most contaminated in Ontario. Studies indicate that ongoing erosion of this highly contaminated sediment by the river again is becoming the new persistent source of mercury transport downstream, which is preventing natural recovery. Significant challenges still include ongoing industrial pollution and legal inaction. They continue to prevent the full restoration of the river. Despite scientific reports, government recommendations, and public pressure, consecutive governments have been slow to act and clean up recommendations and have even suppressed information about the contamination. Instead, there have been decades of government inaction, a history of flawed treatment, infrastructure, and back and forth between provincial and federal governments over responsibility, which have delayed the implementation of effective solutions. The community has launched lawsuits against both the provincial and federal governments over the failure to protect their treaty rights and health. New threats, such as thousands of active mining claims in the Grassy Narrows territory and plans by a gold mining firm to discharge wastewater upstream, further risk contamination and disrupt the community's traditional way of life. The ongoing crisis continues to cause severe health problems and a high rate of youth suicide in the community, diverting energy and focus towards managing acute health needs rather than long-term environmental recovery. After years of advocacy and protests, including a hunger strike by former Chief Steve Fobister Sr., the Canadian government committed to funding a $19.5 million, later adjusted to over $81 million, mercury treatment center within the community. A groundbreaking ceremony for the facility, which will offer specialized inpatient and outpatient services, was held on March 2025. The facility will treat the sickest members of the community, and construction on the long-awaited Mercury Care Home has broken ground again and is expected to be completed in 2027. In addition, the design of a new community water treatment plant is nearing completion to address water quality issues. As to date, there is still not potable water in most of this area. Despite the immense challenges, the community shows incredible resilience, with youth creating their own support systems. And now I know I got off on a tangent about this mercury, but it still affects an entire community, and I think it's important to highlight. There have also been several studies that have shown an increase, again, risk for suicide and other mental health issues related to mercury poisoning. Therefore, this falls in line with the MMIW crisis, although it encompasses more than just women. The knowingly allowing a community to suffer and the lack of accountability to me is a crime. It's unconscionable. Therefore, to end the year, I thought it's time to bring it to light, because that is what these episodes are about, bringing these things out of the darkness, reminding others, not forgetting what shouldn't be forgotten. Now, to all those out there listening, remember, it's a dangerous world we live in.